You know what? It's funny about hitting rock bottom. You always think you'll hear a loud crash when you land. A definitive, soul-shattering boom that tells you it's over. But there isn't one. There's just a quiet dampening of all the colors in your world. A slow leak of warmth until you were just cold. For me, rock bottom smelled like lukewarm Kung Pao chicken and rain. The rain in New York City isn't it like rain anywhere else. It doesn't wash the streets clean. It just stirs up the grime, making the city smell like wet garbage and despair. It was seeping through the cheap nylon of my courier jacket, a pathetic shield against the November chill. The jacket, a fluorescent green monstrosity with a Go Fast Eats logo peeling off the back, was a constant, humiliating reminder of how far I'd fallen. A year ago, I was Jack Riley, the culinary wunderkind of Manhattan. My flagship restaurant, Aria, was a 3-Michelin-star temple of gastronomy, the crown jewel of a $47 million empire I had built from a single food truck and a mountain of ambition. Now I was just Jack, a 44-year-old delivery guy, racing against a timer on a smartphone app for a $7 payout, plus a tip if I was lucky. The weight of the insulated bag on my back was a familiar ache, a physical manifestation of my failure. It wasn't a bad business deal or a shift in market trends that brought me here. It was betrayal, pure and exquisitely executed. A city health inspector, a routine visit, a plate of our signature duck confit, sent from the kitchen by my head chef, Marco Vargas, a sudden, violent illness. An investigation. Traces of a potent, fast-acting foodborne toxin found in the dish. My name, my reputation, my life's work incinerated overnight. I was framed, of course. A meticulous surgical strike. And the architects were the two people I trusted most in the world. My brilliant, ambitious head chef, Marco, and my beautiful, sharp-witted wife, Isabella. The day my world imploded, after the lawyers had used up all their big words, and the reporters had their fill of my public execution. My phone buzzed. A single text message from Isabella. It wasn't an apology or an explanation. It was a verdict. 11 words that became the soundtrack to my ruin. "You're finished, Jack. You'll never work again." She was right. The culinary world is a small, incestuous kingdom. Once you're branded a pariah, every door is bolted shut. My assets were frozen, tangled in legal battles I couldn't afford to fight. My name was toxic, so I vanished. I traded my chef's whites for a ridiculous green jacket and learned the geography of the city, the service elevators and back alleys. I became invisible, just another cog in the gig economy machine, fueled by desperation and stale coffee. Tonight, his delivery was taking me to a place I hadn't seen from this side of the door. A glass tower on Park Avenue, the kind of building where the air itself seems to be filtered through money. The law firm of Chen and Associates occupied the top 3 floors. I remembered reading about them in the Wall Street Journal, back when I used to read it for investment tips, not to shield myself from the rain. The security guard in the lobby looked me up and down, his gaze lingering on my worn-out sneakers, leaving damp footprints on his pristine marble floor. He saw the uniform, the food bag, and dismissed me. I was furniture. It was a cloak of invisibility I'd come to appreciate. It let me observe. The elevator ride up was silent, smooth, and smelled faintly of leather and success. The 54th floor opened into a reception area that was larger than my entire apartment in Queens. A calm, quiet hum of power pervaded the space. I gave the name on the order Arthur Chen to the receptionist, who pointed me down a long hallway without making eye contact. The door to his office was thick, solid oak. I knocked. A quiet, firm voice said, "Come in." The man behind the desk was older, maybe in his late 70s, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were startlingly sharp and intelligent behind thin framed glasses. He was examining a document, but he looked up as I entered, placing the food container on the edge of his massive desk. He gestured to the receipt on the bag. "I just need a signature," I mumbled, my voice rough. He picked up a pen, but he didn't sign. Instead, he stared at the name printed on the order ticket, Jack Riley. Then he slowly, deliberately lifted his eyes to my face. He didn't look at me the way everyone else did, with pity, disgust, or that vacant non-recognition. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. His focus was so intense it felt like a physical weight. "Riley," he said, his voice a low murmur. I knew an Eleanor Riley, years ago, a brilliant woman, fierce. My breath caught in my throat. My mother. She died when I was 20, a sudden aneurysm that stole her from me far too soon. I just nodded, unable to speak. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine, searching my features. "You have her eyes. My God, it is you." He put the pen down and stood up, a strange mix of shock and something else, inevitability, on his face. He walked around the desk and stopped in front of me, this small, impeccably dressed man holding the power to reshape worlds with a few strokes of a pen. He looked at my worn-out jacket, my tired face, and then back into my eyes. And then he spoke the 11 words that became the pivot on which my entire existence would turn. The words that would become the first tremor of an earthquake they would never see coming. "I was your mother's attorney. She left you a trust fund." The air in the room grew thin. The hum of the city outside faded into nothing. My heart, which I thought had been beaten into a dull, steady rhythm of survival, began to pound against my ribs. A trust fund. My mother was a librarian. We were comfortable but never wealthy. I must have looked as stunned as I felt, because he gave a small, sad smile. Eleanor was discreet. She set it up in 1990. The terms were very specific. You couldn't access it until a certain milestone. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "It matures when you turn 45. I stared at him blankly. My mind, a machine that had spent a year calculating tips and delivery times, struggled to process the information. He must have seen the confusion on my face. "Jack," he said gently, "your 45th birthday is next month." My brain felt like an old engine refusing to turn over. The words hung in the silent, expensive air between us, refusing to connect into any logical sequence. 45. Next month. A trust fund. My mother. It was the stuff of fantasy. A plot from a movie you'd watch on a lonely Tuesday night. It wasn't something that happened in the real world. Not to a guy whose biggest financial decision of the day was whether to spring for an extra slice of pizza. Arthur Chen watched me, his expression a careful mixture of patience and clinical observation. He gestured toward one of the plush leather chairs opposite his desk. "Please, Jack, sit down. Let's put this order aside." My body moved on its own. I sank into the chair, the soft leather sighing under my weight. The insulated food bag sat on his desk like an alien artifact, a piece of my grimy reality trespassing in this stratosphere of wealth and power. I felt a sudden, absurd urge to apologize for it. I don't understand, I finally managed to say, my voice a croak. My mother, she was a senior librarian at the New York Public Library. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Greenwich Village. There was no fund. Arthur sat down, folding his hands on the polished mahogany. Your mother, Jack, was one of the most brilliant investors I have ever had the privilege to know. She was also one of the most private. Being a librarian wasn't her job. It was her cover. It was her peace. Her real work, her gift, was seeing the patterns. She saw the matrix behind the market, the ebb and flow of capital that most people are blind to. She started with a small inheritance of her own in the late 80s. By the time she came to me in 1990 to set up this trust, she had already multiplied it tenfold. He leaned forward slightly. She never wanted you to be defined by her money. She wanted you to find your own fire to build something yourself. And you did. She would have been immeasurably proud of Arya. The name of my restaurant felt like a punch to the gut. A ghost of a life I no longer lived. Then why the trust? Why hide it? Because she knew you, he said simply, with no hint of judgment. She knew you had a big heart, Jack. A creator's heart. Passionate, trusting. And she worried that someone might one day see that as a weakness to be exploited. He gave me a sad, knowing look that told me he knew more about my recent history than he was letting on. Joe, she set the age at 45 for a reason. She believed that by then, you would have lived enough life, known enough struggle and success on your own terms, to have the wisdom to handle what she was leaving you. She called it a safety net for a high-wire artist. Her words. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. Her greatest fear for me had come true, and her secret solution was arriving just moments after I'd completely crashed and burned. Arthur slid a heavy, leather-bound portfolio across the desk. It was navy blue, with no markings. The initial investment was modest by Wall Street standards. But your mother's instructions for the portfolio managers were aggressive, prescient, and frankly terrifyingly brilliant. She bet on tech in the 90s, shorted the housing market before 2008. It's all in there. My hand trembled as I reached for it. I opened the cover. The first page was a summary statement, dated today. My eyes scanned past paragraphs of financial jargon, looking for the bottom line. And then I saw it. It wasn't a number. It was a weapon, a declaration of war. A figure so vast, so utterly disconnected from my reality of counting loose change for bus fare, that I had to read it 3 times for it to register. $283,427,000 and change. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. 47 million had made me a king in my world. This was a different realm of existence entirely. This was the kind of money that didn't just buy things. It altered reality. It reshaped landscapes. It settled scores. My mind, numb for so long, began to spark. The gears, rusted with despair, started to grind, slowly at first, then faster. I saw Isabella's mocking smile. I felt the phantom vibration of her final text message. I saw Marco's false sympathy as he stood by my side while the world burned around me. As if sensing the storm brewing inside me, Arthur reached into a desk drawer and pulled out something else. A simple, cream-colored envelope yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in my mother, an elegant, familiar script. She left this for you as well, Arthur said softly. to be given to you with the portfolio. I took it from him. The paper felt warm, alive. For a moment, the astronomical figure on the page in front of me ceased to exist. This was all that mattered. A final message from the woman who had seen my future with such terrifying clarity. I broke the seal. The single sheet of paper inside was filled with the same graceful handwriting. My dearest Jack, if you are reading this, then you have reached the age I chose for you, and I am long gone. I hope your life has been full of joy and passion. I know you build things, Jack. It's in your blood. You take simple ingredients and create magic. I have always been so proud of that fire in you. But fire can be stolen. Passion can be used against you. Never let them mistake your creator's heart for a fool's. The portfolio Arthur has given you is not a prize for you to enjoy. It is a tool for you to wield. Think of it as the finest steel in a world of rust, a hammer to build, a shield to protect. But in the right hands, Jack, in your hands, it can be a scalpel, precise, unforgiving. Use it to build something that can never be taken from you again. Character, justice, a legacy. All my love, Mom. I folded the letter, my knuckles white, a scalpel, precise, unforgiving. I stood up. The shock was receding, replaced by a feeling I hadn't had in a year. Purpose. It was a cold, hard, crystalline thing taking shape in the hollowed-out cavern of my chest. I looked at Arthur Chen, and he must have seen the change in my eyes because he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "What do you need from me, Jack?" he asked. He wasn't talking to the delivery boy anymore. He was talking to the son of Eleanor Riley. "I need a new suit," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "And I need the name of the best private investigator in this city. Someone who used to work for the IRS. Someone who knows how to follow the money. And then, I need you to help me set up a few dozen shell corporations. I have a bill to collect." I left the Chinese food on his desk. I didn't look back. Walking out of that building, the rain was still falling, but I no longer felt it. The fluorescent green jacket felt like a costume I was about to shed. The city lights of Manhattan, once a mocking reminder of a world I'd lost, now looked like a chessboard, laid out and waiting for the first move. They thought they had buried me. They had no idea they had only planted a seed. And my mother, the ghost in the machine, had just provided all the water and sunlight it would ever need. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. By day, I was the ghost in the green jacket, a phantom on a rattling bicycle, navigating the concrete canyons of Manhattan. I picked up pad thai and pepperoni pizzas. I nodded to doormen, and I endured the casual invisibility that came with the uniform. I kept my head down, my earnings pathetic, and my presence utterly forgettable. It was the perfect cover. But at night, in the sterile quiet of a pay-as-you-go office suite that Arthur had secured for me in a nondescript building in the financial district, I became the man my mother had prepared me to be. The first thing I did after leaving Arthur's office was not to rent the suite or hire the investigator. It was to walk into the Tom Ford boutique on Madison Avenue. I was still in my damp courier clothes, smelling of rain and regret. The salesman, a young man with more product in his hair than a small salon, looked at me with a beautifully curated expression of disdain. He thought I was lost. I ignored him, walked directly to a rack, and pulled out a charcoal wool suit. It felt like coming home. "I'll take this," I said, my voice resonating with an authority that had been dormant for a year. And a white shirt, a black tie, and the best leather shoes you have. I need it tailored and delivered to this address by tomorrow morning. I slid a newly issued matte black credit card, courtesy of Arthur's Swift Arrangements, across the glass counter. The name on it was simply J. Riley. The salesman's professional mask flickered. He picked up the card as if it might bite him, ran it, and the machine chimed its quiet, expensive approval. His entire posture changed. The disdain melted into an oily deference. It was a crude, simple lesson in the power I now wielded. Money didn't just talk. It changed the laws of physics around you. It bent light and silenced judgment. That suit became my new uniform. I de-change into it in the sterile bathroom of my rented office. The fine fabric a stark contrast to my worn-out jeans. I wasn't playing dress-up. I was putting on armor. I was reminding myself who I was. Not the broken man on the bicycle, but the architect of what was to come. Arthur introduced me to Marcus Thorne a few days later. Thorne was a man who seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles and quiet suspicion. He was ex-IRS, Criminal Investigation Division, a bloodhound who'd spent 20 years sniffing out hidden assets and elaborate tax frauds. He had a stillness about him that was more intimidating than any overt threat. He didn't look at you. He audited you. We met in my office. I was in my suit. He was in a rumpled raincoat that had probably seen more stakeouts than I'd seen hot meals in the last year. Mr. Chen said you have a financial inquiry, Thorne said, his voice a dry rustle. He scanned the empty room, the single desk, the laptop. He wasn't impressed. I do, I said. I didn't offer him a seat. Two individuals, Isabella Riley and Marco Vargas, they recently opened a restaurant called Ember in Soho. It was formerly my restaurant, Aria. I want to know everything about their financial lives. Every credit card transaction, every wire transfer, every loan, every secret bank account, every dollar they've spent since they stole my life from me. Thorne raised an eyebrow. A fractional movement. Stole. They framed me for poisoning a health inspector, a crime for which they are the sole financial beneficiaries. I stated, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. This wasn't a therapy session. It was a briefing. I don't need you to prove the framing. The police already failed at that. I need you to find the rot beneath the floorboards. I know how they live. I know their appetites. The lifestyle I'm seeing from a distance doesn't match the cash flow of a new restaurant, even a successful one. There's a deficit. I want to know how they're filling it. I slid a file across the desk. It contained their social security numbers, dates of birth, last known addresses, all information a husband would have. I also want to know about their vulnerabilities, vices, gambling, drugs, other partners. Everyone has a loose thread. Find it. Thorne looked at me for a long moment, his gaze analytical. He was weighing the job, and he was weighing me. This is off the books. It will be expensive. Find what I need, I said, and expense will not be a concern. He gave a curt nod, took the file, and walked out without another word. The whole meeting took less than 5 minutes. While Thorne began his hunt, I became a student of my own past. I continued my delivery routes, and I made sure they often took me past Ember. I'd lock my bike across the street, nursing a cold coffee, and I would watch. It was a form of self-torture, but a necessary one. I needed to see them, to study them not as the people I once loved and trusted, but as targets. I saw Isabella, laughing with patrons, draped in new designer dresses I knew she couldn't afford. She had a way of touching a person's arm that made them feel like the most important person in the world. It was a skill she had once used to build our empire, and now she was using it to sustain their stolen one. I saw Marco in the open kitchen, a theatrical performance of a genius at work. He was a good chef. ID taught him myself, but he lacked the soul for it. He was a technician, not an artist. He was playing a role, and from my vantage point, I could see the cracks in the performance, the flash of panic in his eyes when a plate was returned, the forced smile for a demanding customer. They were living on my stage, under my lights, and they had grown arrogant. They believed they had won. They never looked over their shoulders. They never saw the ghost in the green jacket watching from the shadows. One evening, I watched them leave the restaurant after service. A new black Porsche Panamera pulled up to the curb. Marco tossed the keys to the valet like he was born to it. Isabella slid into the passenger seat, wearing a diamond necklace I recognized, one I had given her for our 5th anniversary. Seeing it on her in this new context didn't spark pain. It sparked a cold, clarifying rage. It was like watching someone parade around in a trophy they hadn't earned. That was the moment I stopped thinking of it as revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional act. This was different. This was a restoration, a balancing of the books. In my old life, I lived by the principle of mise en place, everything in its place. It's the foundation of any great kitchen. It's about control, precision, and having every ingredient perfectly prepared before the first flame is ever lit. My new life, I decided, would follow the same principle. Isabella and Marco were simply ingredients in a dish I was just beginning to prep, and I would be patient. I would cut and season and prepare every single component with meticulous care. Because the one thing I learned from my mother as a letter is that the best meals and the most devastating reckonings are always served cold. Thorn was worth every penny. 2 weeks after our initial meeting, a sleek, encrypted hard drive was delivered by a bonded courier to my anonymous office. There was no note. None was needed. Plugging it into my laptop, I entered a world of meticulously organized deceit. Thorn had flayed their lives open. He'd compiled bank statements from shell accounts in the Caymans, credit card receipts that painted a picture of hemorrhaging cash, and surveillance reports that read like a soap opera script. The first key finding was exactly what ID suspected. Ember was a sinking ship masquerading as a luxury yacht. They had leveraged everything to get it open, using fraudulent profit and loss statements from Aria's final months. Statements I now realized Isabella had been carefully doctoring. They were bleeding money on extravagant decor, overpriced ingredients to keep up appearances, and their own lavish lifestyles. The Porsche wasn't leased. It was rented by the week, a pathetic pantomime of wealth. But the real treasure was buried deeper in the files. Thorn had found the loose thread. His name was Vincent Moretti, a mid-level player in the Gambino family's loan sharking operation. Marco, it turned out, had a long-standing and poorly hidden gambling addiction. He owed Moretti's people nearly $200,000, a debt that was growing at a crippling weekly vig. Thorn's report included discreetly snapped photos of Marco meeting a hulking figure in a Staten Island coffee shop, his face pale with sweat passing over a thick envelope of cash. Cash that should have been going to Ember-est suppliers. This was their deficit filler. This was the source of their desperation. They hadn't just framed me for greed. They had framed me to stay alive. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source. A name on a list of Aria's former employees flagged for follow-up, Luis Fernandez. A dishwasher. I remembered him. He was a quiet, hard-working kid from Ecuador, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He had a wife and a young daughter. He was the kind of person you build a business on, invisible to the customers, but the absolute backbone of the operation. ID always made a point to know the names of my dishwashers. It's a lesson my first mentor taught me. A kitchen is only as strong as its cleanest plate. According to Thorne's notes, Luis had been fired by Marco without cause 2 days after I was ruined. He had been given no severance, just a threat to keep his mouth shut if he ever wanted to work in another New York kitchen again. He was now working off the books at a car wash in the Bronx. It took me 3 days to find him. I didn't go in my suit. I went in my courier gear, my face obscured by a baseball cap and the city's grime. The car wash was a loud, chaotic place, smelling of cheap soap and wet asphalt. I saw him in the detailing bay, his back bent, meticulously cleaning the interior of a luxury sedan. He looked tired, older than I remembered. I waited until his shift was over. He came out of the employee entrance, wiping his hands on a rag, and I stepped out of the alleyway. "Luis," I said quietly. He flinched, his eyes wide with fear when he recognized me. He looked around wildly, as if expecting Marco or one of his thugs to appear from the shadows. "Mr. Riley, what are you doing here? You shouldn't be here." "I'm not going to cause you any trouble, Luis. I just need to ask you about the day of the inspection, the day everything went wrong." He shook his head, a sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cold. "I can't. I have a family. They told me." "I know what they told you," I interrupted gently. "I know they fired you. Marco and Isabella. They took your job, just like they took mine." I pulled a thick envelope from the inside pocket of my jacket. "This is $10,000, Luis, for your time, and for the trouble they caused you." His eyes darted from my face to the envelope. $10,000 was a fortune to him. It was a lifeline. But the fear was still stronger. "They will hurt me, my family. They will never touch you," I said, my voice hardening with a certainty that surprised even myself. "I'm going to give you my personal number. If anyone ever bothers you, you call it. It will be taken care of. Permanently. I'm not asking you to go to the police. I'm just asking you to tell me what you saw." He looked at me for a long time, searching my eyes. Maybe he saw the ghost of the man who used to thank him for his hard work. Or maybe he saw the new man, the one who spoke of permanent solutions with a terrifying calm. He slowly took the envelope. We walked to a nearby diner, a greasy spoon where no one would look at us twice. Over cups of bitter coffee, he talked. His voice was barely a whisper. He told me he'd been in the dry storage room, grabbing more linens, when Marco and the health inspector, as waiter, came back to the pass. He saw Marco, thinking no one was watching, pull a small, dark glass vial from his chef's coat. He saw him use a dropper to add 3 clear drops to the duck confit just before the plate went out. Luis said Marco, as hands were shaking. A few minutes later, he saw Isabella join Marco near the kitchen exit. He couldn't hear everything, but he heard her say 2 things clearly. "Is it done?" And then, after Marco nodded, a chilling whisper, "Good. Now he can never hold anything over us again." It was the final confirmation, the nail in their coffin. I drove Luis home myself in a rental car. Before he got out, I gave him a card with Arthur Chen's number on it. "That's my lawyer. He's going to contact you to get a formal, notarized affidavit of what you told me. He will also arrange for a new job for you and your family, somewhere quiet, out of the city if you like, and a new apartment. Consider it a signing bonus for a new chapter in your life." He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "Why, Mr. Riley? Why do all this for me?" "Because you were loyal, Luis. And in the world I'm building, loyalty is the only currency that matters." That night, I didn't go back to my depressing room in Queens. I checked into a suite at the Four Seasons under a new name, one of the many identities Arthur had created for me. From the window, I could see the lights of the city spread out like a jeweled tapestry. A year ago, I had been one of those lights. Now, I was the darkness that moved between them. The pieces were in place. The financial trap, the eyewitness, the evidence of their desperation. It was time to stop watching and start directing. The next morning, I made my first move. Through a series of anonymous offshore corporations, I began to buy up Ember and's debt. I started small, with a produce supplier they owed $30,000. Then a linen service, then a wine distributor. One by one, I became their silent, unseen creditor. They were so busy trying to plug the holes in their sinking ship, they never bothered to check who was holding the bucket. They were mice in a maze, and I was slowly, methodically, removing all the exits. The trap wasn't set yet, but the steel was being forged. The beauty of a financial siege is its silence. It's not a frontal assault. It's a war of attrition, fought on spreadsheets and in wire transfers. Over the next month, my newly formed holding companies, with sterile names like Apex Consolidated and Oceanic Ventures, became the legal owners of every scrap of paper that represented a claim on Ember. I bought their outstanding loan from the restaurant supply company that had fronted them the cash for their custom Italian stove. I bought the debt from the construction firm that had renovated the dining room. Finally, in a masterstroke orchestrated by Arthur's team, I acquired the commercial mortgage on the building itself from a regional bank that was eager to offload a risky asset. Isabella and Marco had no idea. They continued their frantic dance, robbing Peter to pay Paul, unaware that Peter and Paul now both worked for me. They were drowning, and every frantic gasp for air just pulled them deeper into my ocean. With their financial world now firmly in my grasp, it was time to apply pressure to the physical one. It was time for the symphony to begin. The first note was subtle. I hired a new team, not of lawyers or investigators, but of artists in the field of calculated inconvenience. Through another shell company, I purchased the small, derelict commercial space directly next to Ember. The day after the sale closed, a fleet of construction vehicles arrived at 7 a.m., precisely 1 hour before their dinner service began. The noise was apocalyptic. Jackhammers shattering concrete, the high-pitched scream of metal saws, the percussive roar of a diesel generator. The vibrations shook the wine glasses on Ember's tables. Dust, thick and chalky, seemed to seep through the very walls. I'd given the foreman, a gruff man named O'Malley, who understood the value of a significant cash bonus, very specific instructions. I want you to imagine you are deconstructing the entire building, from the inside out. using only the loudest tools known to man. Your work schedule is from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., Monday through Saturday. Reservations at Ember began to evaporate. Walk-in traffic died. The few brave souls who ventured in complained vociferously. The restaurant's pristine, expensive ambiance was shattered by the soundtrack of urban warfare. The second movement of my symphony was aimed at their supply chain. My financial analyst had identified their key suppliers: the farm that provided their prized heritage pork, the importer who sourced their rare white truffles. Using a proxy buyer, a legitimate restaurant consultant based in Chicago, I approached these suppliers with offers they couldn't refuse. I offered to buy out their entire stock for the next 6 months at a 20% premium. Suddenly, Marco signature dishes were impossible to produce. The pork belly vanished from the menu. The truffle risotto was replaced with a pedestrian mushroom version. Quality plummeted. The whispers started among the city's notoriously fickle food critics and bloggers. Ember has lost its touch, a shadow of its former self. The third and most vicious movement was a direct strike on their reputation. I had Thorne compile a dossier on every major food blogger and critic in New York. I wasn't looking for dirt. I was looking for ego. I found my target in a man named Julian Croft, a notoriously acerbic critic with a massive online following and a love for theatrical takedowns. Through an anonymous third party, I arranged for a concerned patron to gift Croft a lavish dinner experience at Ember. The anonymous patron also paid the restaurant a handsome fee to ensure Croft received the best possible service. The trap was set. The night of Croft Elm visit, I orchestrated a cascade of minor disasters. A plumbing emergency in the building. A crew I hired had purposefully clogged a main drain line, forced the shutdown of 2 of the 3 guest restrooms. A clerical error by the wine supplier, whose debt I now owned, resulted in the delivery of several cases of cheap cooking wine, instead of the vintage Bordeaux Marco had ordered for VIP tables. The final touch was a call from my construction foreman to the city's Department of Buildings, anonymously reporting unsafe structural vibrations coming from Ember itself, prompting a mid-dinner visit from a surly city inspector. Croft, as Review, published 2 days later, was a masterpiece of journalistic evisceration. He titled it, "Ember, a Restaurant in the Throes of a Very Public Death." He detailed the deafening noise, the missing menu items, the overflowing toilet, the arrival of a city inspector. He described his meal as a culinary cry for help. It went viral. The pressure was working. The cracks in their unholy alliance began to show. Thorne had my old restaurant, their new battlefield, wired for sound. The tiny, undetectable microphones his team had planted picked up every panicked, venomous exchange. ID listened to the recordings at night, in my silent, darkened office, a glass of fine single malt in my hand. It was better than theater. "The construction is killing us, Marco. You have to do something." Isabella's voice, usually so smooth and controlled, was shrill with panic. "What do you want me to do, Isabella? Go out there with a hammer. This is your fault. You and your obsession with appearances. That Porsche, the damn necklace, the parties." Marco's voice was a guttural roar of a trapped animal. "My fault. You were the one who got us into this mess with your bookie." Moretti called again. "He's not happy. Where is the money you were supposed to have for him this week?" And then, the moment I had been waiting for. The confession, spat out in the heat of a bitter, desperate argument. "I don't have it," Marco screamed, his voice breaking. "I don't have it because this place is a black hole. I did what you wanted. I put the drops in the food. I ruined Jack for you, for us. I did the dirty work while you played the grieving, supportive wife. This was supposed to be our golden ticket, but you have bled it dry. You poisoned his life, and you poisoned mine." I leaned back in my chair, the cold glass of the tumbler resting against my lips. I closed my eyes and let his words wash over me. I put the drops in the food. It was done. I had it all. The motive, the means, the confession. Every ingredient was prepped. Every instrument was in place. The overture was over. It was time for the final act. The next day, Arthur Chen sent a single, formal letter on behalf of Apex Consolidated Holdings, the primary and sole creditor of Ember LLC. It informed them that due to multiple sustained defaults on their financial obligations, their presence was required at a mandatory creditors meeting to discuss the immediate liquidation of all assets. The meeting was to be held in 2 days' time. The location, the main dining room of Ember, and the sole representative of their creditor would be a Mr. J. Riley. The dining room of Ember was a tomb, 2 days of being officially closed, and the silence was already thick with the dust of failure. The afternoon light struggled through the grimy windows, illuminating the empty tables like rows of headstones. The ghost of Arya was palpable. The opulent decor they had chosen now looked gaudy and cheap, a desperate attempt to paint over a masterpiece. I arrived early. I wasn't wearing my courier uniform or the Tom Ford suit of a predator. I was wearing what I used to wear on a Tuesday afternoon service: dark trousers, a crisp white chef's shirt, and an apron tied neatly around my waist. I walked behind the bar, opened a bottle of sparkling water, and polished a single wineglass until it gleamed. Then, I sat down at what used to be my favorite table, Table 7, in the corner, with a perfect view of the entire room and the open kitchen. And I waited. They came in together, but they were miles apart. They looked haggard, beaten. Isabella's designer dress was wrinkled. Her makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Marco, who always carried himself with a chef's swagger, was stooped, his face a pasty gray. They looked like defendants walking into a courtroom. They stopped dead when they saw me. Isabella's face went through a rapid-fire sequence of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. Marco just looked like he was going to be sick. "Jack," Isabella breathed, her voice a venomous hiss. "What the hell are you doing here? This is a private meeting." "It is," I said, my voice calm and even. I took a slow sip of water. "I'm the one who called it." I let that sink in. I watched the gears turn in their heads as they tried to reconcile the man they had destroyed. The delivery boy they imagined was sleeping in some roach-infested hovel in Queens, with the man sitting before them, holding all the cards. "You!" Marco scoffed, a pathetic attempt at bravado. "What are you? The caterer. Get out of here before we call security." "There is no security, Marco," I said, placing the glass down with a soft click. "I let them go yesterday, along with the rest of the staff. After all, as the sole proprietor of this establishment, it was my prerogative." I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Please sit. Let's not make this more unpleasant than it needs to be." They didn't move. They just stared, their faces a mixture of fury and fear. You see, I continued, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. You two were always good at the big, dramatic gestures, the grand betrayal, the public execution. But you were never very good with the details, the quiet, boring paperwork that underpins everything. While you were playing king and queen in my castle, I was buying the ground out from under it. Every loan, every line of credit, every supplier's debt, it all leads to me. I reached into a simple manila folder ID placed on the table and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. It was the deed to the building. You don't even own the air you're breathing right now, Isabella. She finally moved, snatching the paper from the table. Her eyes scanned it, her knuckles white. The fight drained out of her face, replaced by a cold, terrifying understanding. How? She whispered. The money. You had nothing. An inheritance, I said simply. A safety net I never knew I had. Turns out my mother was a much better judge of character than I was. I pulled out another document. It was the notarized affidavit from Luis Fernandez, his testimony laid out in cold, legal prose, detailing every second of what he witnessed on the day of the poisoning. I slid it across the table. Marco glanced at it, saw the name, and his face went ashen. He was just a dishwasher, Marco stammered. A nobody. There are no nobodies, Marco, I said, my voice losing its warmth, turning to steel. That was your first mistake. You saw people as props. I saw them as the foundation. And you threatened his family. That was your second mistake. Finally, I took out a small digital audio recorder and placed it on the table between us. I pressed play. Marco's voice, tinny and distorted, filled the silent restaurant. I did what you wanted. I put the drops in the food. I ruined Jack for you, for us. The color drained completely from Isabella's face. She looked at Marco with pure loathing, the look of a predator who has just realized her partner has led them both into a hunter's snare. I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. I have a choice for you, I said, leaning forward. There are 2 doors. Behind door number 1, I hand this recorder, Luis's affidavit, and a mountain of financial fraud evidence compiled by a very talented former IRS investigator to the district attorney's office. You'll be charged with conspiracy, aggravated assault, reckless endangerment. The press will have a field day. The lovers who poisoned a restaurant kingpin. You'll spend the best years of your life in separate, very unpleasant correctional facilities. I paused, letting the images form in their minds. Or there's door number 2. I slid a final set of documents across the table, along with a pen. This is a full confession. It details everything, the premeditated plot, the execution, the financial motives. It also contains a clause that transfers every single asset you both possess, bank accounts, property, that ridiculous rented Porsche, to a compensation fund for the employees of Aria whose lives you destroyed. You sign it. You walk out of here with nothing. Absolutely nothing. And you disappear. If I ever see or hear from either of you again in this city, the contents of my folder go directly to the DA. You will have no money to run and nowhere to hide. They stood frozen, trapped in the wreckage of their own greed. Isabella looked at the papers, then at me, her eyes searching for a crack, a weakness, any sign of the trusting man she had married and discarded. She found none. She saw only the cold, dispassionate resolve of a man who had been to the bottom and had learned how to build with stone and ice. Marco broke first. He snatched the pen and signed his name with a jagged, angry scrawl. He didn't even read it. He just wanted out. He threw the pen on the table and looked at Isabella. "It's over," he spat. "He won." Isabella stared at the confession for a full minute. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she picked up the pen and signed her name. Her elegant signature a final, ironic flourish on the death warrant of her own life. She pushed the papers back toward me. "You think this is a victory, Jack?" she said, her voice dripping with a final, desperate drop of venom. "Look at you. You're just like them now. Cold, calculating. You lost everything that made you. You." I stood up and walked around the table until I was standing directly in front of her. I looked down into her eyes, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no pain. Just the quiet peace of a debt settled. "No, Isabella," I said softly. "You're wrong. You didn't destroy me. You just burned away everything that wasn't essential. Everything I lost was just a thing, and things can be replaced. What I have now is balance." I left them there, in the husk of their stolen dream. I didn't look back. I walked out into the bright New York afternoon, leaving the apron on the bar. My work in the kitchen was done. Epilogue, 1 year later. The restaurant at this address is not called Aria, it's called Eleanor's. It's smaller, more intimate. There are no Michelin stars, because I never invited the inspectors. It doesn't need them. Reservations are booked 6 months in advance. The food is simple, honest, and perfect. I own it, but my name is nowhere on the paperwork. The head chef is a woman I mentored years ago, a fiery young talent with a true artist's soul. The general manager is Luis Fernandez. He's taking night classes at Cornell's hospitality school, fully funded by an anonymous scholarship. His family lives in a beautiful brownstone in Brooklyn that I bought for them. I am sitting at table 7 with Arthur Chen. We read drinking a 1990 Bordeaux, the year my mother set my future in motion. We rarely talk about the past. We talk about markets, about art, about the future. Arthur raises his glass. "To balance," he says, with a knowing smile. I nod and raise my own. My phone buzzes on the table. A news alert from a financial crimes blog. I glance at the headline: "Fugitive Restaurateurs Isabella Riley and Marco Vargas apprehended in Miami on federal fraud warrants." Arthur looks at me. "I thought you were going to let them disappear." I take a sip of wine. It tastes of victory and time. "I did," I said. "I gave them a year's head start, but some debts accrue interest." I looked around the warm, vibrant room, filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. I saw Luis seating a happy couple. I saw the passion and integrity in the kitchen. I looked at the small, understated portrait of my mother hanging by the entrance. Isabella was wrong. I hadn't lost myself. I had finally found the most important ingredient, the one my mother had tried to teach me all along. It wasn't about the money or the fame. It was about building something that could weather any storm, something real, something with a foundation of loyalty, fortified with justice. And that was a recipe they could never steal.